They shared a bed for 8 years and somehow became strangers. No cheating, no big betrayal, just silence, the kind that creeps in one ignored dinner at a time. One I'll tell you later that never comes. Until two people who once finished each other's sentences can't even look each other in the eye anymore. This is the story of Emma and Ryan, a love that didn't die from hate. It died from neglect, and by the time they realized what they'd lost, it might have already been too late. Stay until the end, because what happens when they see each other again might surprise you. If you've ever loved someone and let the silence win, hit subscribe, because this channel is for you. And drop a comment below. Have you ever gone quiet with someone you loved instead of saying what you really felt? Let's get into it. How it began. Some meetings feel like they were written before they ever happened. The one between Emma and Ryan was one of those. It was a rainy Friday in September, and Emma was hurrying down 5th Street trying to shield a stack of blueprints under her arm when an umbrella appeared out of nowhere over her head. She glanced over and saw a guy with a crooked smile, wet hair stuck to his forehead, gripping the handle with both hands like it was the most important thing he'd ever done. "You were about to drown in paper," he said, laughing. She laughed too, not sure what to say back. They walked 3 blocks in shared silence, all the way to the door of the building where Emma worked. Before she went in, he asked her name. She asked his. Ryan. A plain name, almost unremarkable, but one that would come to mean something starting that day. There was no exchange of numbers in that moment. Instead, there was an entire month of coincidences, running into each other at the same coffee shop, the same bakery, the same bus stop, until, tired of pretending it was all chance, they finally traded numbers and admitted, a little awkwardly, that maybe they'd been looking for each other. The relationship started slow, the way good things usually do. Sunday movies, phone calls that stretched into the early hours, handwritten notes Emma kept in a shoebox. Old-fashioned, she said, but sweet. Ryan was an engineer, dedicated to his work, but also prone to unexpected gestures, showing up with flowers for no reason, leaving notes in her bag, learning to make the pot roast her grandmother used to make, just to see her smile at the taste of home. There were, of course, the normal bumps of any new relationship. A first silly fight over jealousy of a coworker of Emma's, a misunderstanding that nearly ended things early on, when Ryan canceled a beach weekend because of a grad school exam, and she read it as him not making her a priority. But back then, they still knew how to talk. They'd sit down face to face and work through the discomfort before it could take root. It was as if they had an unspoken rule never to let the sun go down on a hurt feeling, a rule that, years later, they'd both forget to honor. The proposal happened on a simple trip to a small mountain town in Vermont, the kind of place they picked because it was cheap and charming at the same time. On a foggy morning, sitting on a rock beside a small waterfall, Ryan pulled a modest ring out of his pocket, bought with months of secret savings, and said, stumbling over his words, "I don't have a speech ready. I just know I don't want to wake up another day of my life without knowing you'll be around. Marry me?" Emma cried, laughed, and said yes before he even finished getting down on one knee on the wet rock. It was one of those moments they'd both look back on years later, each in their own way. She with a longing for a time when "I don't want to wake up without you" was enough to calm any insecurity. He with the shame of knowing that promise, made so sincerely, had slowly gotten lost in the rush of everyday life. They got married 3 years later, in a simple ceremony in her parents' backyard. There wasn't money for a big party, but there were friends, family, and the certainty, that naive, beautiful certainty only the start of a marriage offers, that everything would work out, because their love was different, stronger, built to last. Emma's mother, tearing up, said during the toast that she'd never seen her daughter smile like that, a smile from the inside out. No one imagined, in that backyard full of flowers and laughter, that it would take years for that same smile to come back. For the first few years, that's how it was. A small apartment in the Riverside neighborhood, furniture bought little by little, dinners sometimes thrown together with nothing but bread and eggs. Because money was tight, but the will to be together never was. Emma worked as an architect at a construction firm. Ryan climbed the ranks in engineering. There were dreams, a house of their own, a trip to Portugal, maybe a kid somewhere down the line. No one, looking at that couple in the early years, would have imagined what came next. And that's exactly why this story needs to be told, because love, however real, isn't immune to time, to exhaustion, and especially to the silence that settles in when two people stop listening to each other. The first cracks, no one notices the exact moment a marriage starts to crack. It's like moisture on a wall. At first, it's a small stain, barely noticeable, easy to ignore because it doesn't bother anyone yet. Only years later do you notice the plaster falling away. In the 6th year of marriage, Ryan was offered a promotion that meant more responsibility, more recognition, and a lot more hours away from home. He said yes without thinking twice. It was everything he'd always wanted, proof that the effort had paid off. Emma supported him the way she always did. But inside her, a strange feeling was growing, a loneliness she couldn't quite name. The nights of conversation were, little by little, replaced by silent dinners, each of them staring at their own phone. Weekends, once set aside for each other, started getting swallowed by work meetings. Just this one thing and I'll be right there, deadlines that never seemed to end. Emma, for her part, was also growing professionally, landing important projects, starting to put her own name on buildings, and, without quite noticing, was pulling away too, filling the empty nights alone with work, because it was easier than sitting with his absence. The problem wasn't the physical distance exactly. It was the absence of attention. It was, I'll tell you later, turning into, never mind. It's not a big deal. It was the joke one of them told that the other stopped laughing at, because they hadn't really been listening for a long time. One night, Emma made a special dinner. No particular reason, just a wish to bring something back to life. She lit candles, put on the song that had played at their wedding. Ryan came home 2 hours late, exhausted, with no energy left to notice the effort. He ate quickly, thanked her absent-mindedly, and went to bed. Emma sat at the table, watching the candles burn out on their own, feeling for the first time a loneliness that hurt worse than actually being alone. The loneliness of being in the same room as someone and not being seen. She didn't say anything that night. Or the next. She tucked the hurt away the way you tuck a broken object into a drawer, thinking you'll fix it later. But broken objects, left too long, start to rust. There were in that stretch of time small signs that went unnoticed or were quietly ignored. A dating anniversary forgotten, not their wedding anniversary, but that smaller, sillier date the two of them used to mark. The day of the umbrella, which they'd usually celebrate with a low-key dinner at home. Ryan just didn't remember that year. Emma didn't say anything, but she filed it away silently, one more item on the invisible list of disappointments piling up. There was also the vacation that never happened. For 2 years running, they planned to visit Portugal, an old dream of theirs, fed by books and documentaries they used to watch together back when they were dating. But there was always a project too important for Ryan to step away from, a deadline that couldn't wait, a client who needed him specifically during those weeks. By the 3rd canceled trip, Emma stopped bringing it up. Not because she'd given up on the dream, but because she was tired of being the only one keeping it alive. And then there were the conversations that thinned out. In the early days, the two of them could talk for hours about nothing. A book, a news story, some silly childhood memory. Slowly, those conversations got replaced by functional exchanges. Did you pay the electric bill? Is there anything for dinner? What time are you home tomorrow? Communication that used to be rich and spontaneous had turned into household logistics. Emma's sister Claire was the first to notice at a family lunch that something had shifted. "You two barely even look at each other," she said, half joking, half serious over a Sunday meal. Emma laughed it off and changed the subject, but the comment kept nagging at her for days afterward, like a truth she still wasn't ready to face head-on. And so, year after year, the two of them slowly turned into roommates, bill splitters, routine companions. The love was still there, hidden between the lines, but the intimacy, that closeness that once let them understand each other with a single glance, had gotten lost somewhere between meetings, deadlines, and silences left unresolved. The pride that silences, it was on an ordinary Tuesday that the first big fight happened. Not over anything dramatic, as these things usually go. It was over a forgotten birthday. Not Emma's, but her mother's, which Ryan had promised to celebrate with her and then didn't show up for. Citing a last-minute meeting, Emma, who had been quietly stockpiling months of small hurts, exploded. And once that faucet was open, everything that had been building came pouring out at once. The loneliness at dinner, the broken promises, the feeling of being alone even while sharing a bed with someone. Ryan, caught off guard by the intensity of her reaction, got defensive. He said he worked that hard precisely to give her the life she deserved, that it wasn't fair to be criticized like that she disappeared into her own projects too. The fight, which could have been an honest conversation about emotional distance, turned into a contest over who suffered more, who tried harder, who was right. It was the first time, in 8 years of marriage, that the two of them slept in separate rooms. The next morning, neither backed down. Emma was waiting for an apology that acknowledged her pain. Ryan was waiting for recognition that he sacrificed too. Neither of them understood that both hurts were real, and that the silent pride keeping them from being the first to reach out was the real poison. The weeks that followed brought a cold truce. They talked about what was necessary, bills, groceries, the week's schedule, but the warmth had drained out of their words. No more goodbye kiss in the morning. No more I love you before bed. Just a functional, painfully polite coexistence, like two strangers sharing the same address. Close friends noticed the change. Claire tried to talk to Emma about it, but Emma brushed it off, said everything was fine, said it was just a phase. She lied to everyone else because she still couldn't admit to herself that the marriage she'd once dreamed of was slowly emptying out. Ryan, for his part, threw himself even harder into work. It was easier to solve engineering problems than to face the growing distance at home. Every problem solved at the office was a small victory that, on the surface, made up for the sense of failure he felt inside his own house. And that's how, between unspoken pride and unresolved hurt, Emma and Ryan's marriage began its slow, quiet unraveling, not for lack of love, but for too much silence. The offer that changed everything. Almost 2 years passed in that state of cold truce, with small moments of closeness followed by relapses into distance. It was during this stretch that a work opportunity came into Emma's life, leading a major architecture project in another city. For 6 months, she told Ryan about it on a Sunday night, half hoping for a reaction of support, maybe even concern about being apart that long. But his response was short, almost indifferent. If that's what you want, go for it. That sentence, said without malice, but also without any effort to hold on to her, hurt more than any fight before it. For the first time, with total clarity, Emma felt that maybe the marriage no longer made sense for either of them. Not because there wasn't love, but because there was too much exhaustion left to fight for it. She took the project. In the weeks before the move, the two of them treated each other with a strange, almost ceremonial gentleness, as if they both knew without saying it out loud that this physical separation would also mark the beginning of something more final. The night before she left, Emma packed while Ryan watched from the bedroom doorway. There was a moment, just one, when their eyes met, and for a second it seemed like something could be said, something that would change the direction of everything. But the moment passed. Ryan just said, "Safe travels," and went to the living room to watch TV alone. The last attempt before Emma accepted the project in the other city, there had been one attempt, maybe the only truly conscious attempt in 8 years to save the marriage. It was Claire who suggested it after hearing her sister cry on the phone one night. "Have you two thought about couples counseling?" Emma brought the suggestion to Ryan with a mix of hope and fear. Hope that it might be the turning point they needed, fear that he'd react with his usual defensiveness. To her surprise, he agreed. Maybe because deep down he also felt something needed to change. Or maybe because he couldn't stand seeing that constant sadness in his wife's eyes anymore. The first sessions were uncomfortable. The therapist, a calm-voiced woman named Dr. Bennett, asked each of them to talk about what they felt without the other interrupting or getting defensive. For Ryan, that felt nearly impossible, listening to Emma describe years of loneliness without immediately listing every reason he worked so hard. Every proof of his effort and dedication, heard in a way he didn't know how to process without reacting. In the third session, Dr. Bennett asked a question that kept echoing in both their heads for weeks. "Ryan, when you were a kid, what happened in your house when someone showed sadness or needed emotional support?" He sat in silence for a long moment before answering, his voice low. "My dad used to say feelings were for people who had nothing better to do. We learned to solve things on our own by working. Crying was a waste of time. That answer opened for the first time a crack of understanding in Emma. It didn't excuse the distance, but it explained in part where it came from. Ryan didn't know how to be emotionally present because he'd never learned that it was allowed, let alone necessary. But understanding where a pattern comes from isn't the same as fixing it. Over 6 sessions, there were small breakthroughs, moments when Ryan managed, with visible effort, to say what he felt without hiding behind justifications. There were also setbacks, entire sessions where he'd close off again, blaming work exhaustion, calling therapy just digging up old wounds for no reason. At the 7th session, scheduled for a Thursday evening, Ryan canceled because of a last-minute meeting. Emma went alone, sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes, hoping he'd show up late the way he sometimes did. He never showed. It was in that empty waiting room, staring at a door that never opened, that Emma felt, with painful clarity, that she might be fighting alone for a marriage only she still had the strength to try to save. She didn't stop individual therapy after that. She kept going, no longer as a couple, but as someone trying to understand her own patterns, her own silences, her own share of responsibility in the mutual wear and tear. It was only a few weeks after that empty session that the offer for the project in the other city came in. And although Emma never said it out loud, part of her accepted that opportunity as a way to run, to test, from a distance, whether her absence would make any difference to Ryan, or whether, just like in that empty waiting room, he simply wouldn't show up. The separation Emma came back from the work trip on a Saturday morning. She didn't tell Ryan the exact time in advance. Part of her wanted to quietly test whether he'd remember, whether he'd ask, whether he'd show any eagerness for her return. He didn't ask. She got home and found the apartment empty. Ryan was out playing basketball with friends, like he did every Saturday. When he got back that afternoon, he found her sitting in the living room, suitcase still packed beside the couch. The air felt strange, heavy, like the air before a storm. "We need to talk," Emma said, in a tone that left no doubt about how serious the moment was. The conversation that followed lasted hours. There was no shouting, no heated accusations. Instead, there was a quiet, mature sadness, like someone finally facing a truth they'd been putting off for too long. Emma talked about the loneliness she'd felt for years, even while married. She talked about the exhaustion of waiting for a gesture that never came, about feeling like she'd become invisible in her own home. Ryan, for the first time in a long time, didn't get defensive. He listened, and in truly listening, he began to recognize, with a mix of pain and shame, how much he'd checked out emotionally, hiding behind work, behind pride, behind the fear of admitting his own mistakes. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice breaking. "I just stopped knowing how to show it," Emma cried. So did he. But the tears, this time, weren't enough to rebuild what had worn away over so many years of accumulated silence. There was love, yes, they both knew that. But there was also an emotional exhaustion too deep to resolve in a single conversation, however sincere. They decided then to separate, not as an act of anger, but as a painful acknowledgement that maybe they needed time to figure out who they were individually, time to heal the wounds they'd unknowingly inflicted on each other, time to perhaps one day find their way back to each other different. More mature, more ready, Ryan stayed in the apartment. Emma went to stay temporarily at her sister Claire's place, taking only the essentials with her, and the strange feeling of being, all at once, relieved and devastated. The night Emma left for good, Ryan sat on the couch, staring at the empty space beside him, feeling for the first time in a long while the real weight of what he'd lost. It wasn't just a wife leaving. It was an entire life built together, years of closeness, the future plans that now felt distant and uncertain. He didn't cry that night. The pain was too big for tears. It was the kind of pain that settles in slowly, like an emptiness you only fully feel days, weeks, months later. Chapter 6. Separate Lives. The first months after the separation were the hardest for both of them, though neither knew at the time just how much the other was also suffering in silence. Emma tried to rebuild herself through work, throwing herself into increasingly demanding projects, as if professional success could fill the void left by the end of her marriage. She started therapy twice a week, A decision she should have made years earlier, she thought. Maybe everything would have been different. Slowly, she began to understand her own patterns, the difficulty asking for help, the tendency to shut down when hurt, the silent expectation that the other person would guess her needs without her ever having to say them out loud. Ryan, on the other hand, avoided therapy, avoided talking about any of it, avoided above all feeling. He kept working the same excessive hours, but now without the comfort of knowing someone was waiting for him at home. The empty nights in the apartment they used to share became a constant reminder of what he'd lost. Mutual friends tried carefully to stay in touch with both of them without taking sides. In casual conversations, each of them would ask about the other with a curiosity disguised as indifference. Is she doing okay? Did he ask about me? Questions that carried underneath an unspoken wish for reconnection. 6 months passed. Emma began tentatively to consider dating other people. Nothing serious, just the occasional dinner that never went anywhere because, deep down, some part of her still compared any new connection to the closeness she'd had with Ryan, flaws and all. Ryan, for his part, turned down every attempt by friends to set him up with someone. He wasn't ready, and secretly didn't want to be ready, because admitting that would mean accepting Emma no longer had a place in his future. It was during this period that Ryan finally started seeing a therapist. Not entirely on his own initiative, but after a hard conversation with his older brother, who confronted him about the repeating patterns of emotional shutdown he'd noticed since childhood, inherited, maybe from an upbringing where feelings were treated like weakness. In therapy, Ryan began to understand that his habit of retreating into work wasn't just dedication to his career, but a way of running from emotional conflict he didn't know how to face. He came to understand painfully that his silence, which he'd always seen as a way of keeping the peace, had, in fact, been one of the main reasons Emma had pulled away. It was a slow, painful process full of setbacks and hard realizations. But little by little, both Emma and Ryan began, each in their own way, to grow into more self-aware, more mature versions of themselves, versions that, ironically, might have had a real shot at making the marriage work. If they'd existed sooner, there was an episode, about 4 months after the separation, that hit Emma hard. She needed to go back to the old apartment to pick up a few boxes she'd left behind, mostly books and a collection of old photos. She gave Ryan a heads up, and they arranged a time when he wouldn't be home, to avoid the discomfort of an unplanned encounter. But walking into the apartment, still using the key she hadn't had the heart to give back, Emma came across something that caught her off guard, the shoebox where she kept the old letters. The ones Ryan used to write early in their relationship was sitting open on the coffee table, a few letters scattered around it, as if someone had recently been rereading them. She never asked him about it, but she kept that image quietly, as a sign that maybe he too was, in his own way, revisiting what they'd lost. On Ryan's side, there was a particularly hard night, around the 5th month of the separation, when he decided, on impulse, to drive over to the neighborhood where Emma was temporarily staying with her sister. He sat parked across the street for almost an hour, without the courage to get out of the car, without knowing exactly what he'd say if she came outside. He drove home without her ever knowing he'd been there. On the way back, he turned on the radio, trying to drown out his own thoughts, but the song playing, A Cruel Coincidence, was the same one that had played at their wedding. He turned the radio off and drove the rest of the way in silence, eyes welling up, feeling, for the first time in a long while, truly alone. Those small moments, invisible to each other, were quiet proof that the bond between them, though officially broken, was still pulsing, wounded, but alive, somewhere inside them both. Chapter 7. The regretta year had passed since the separation. Emma and Ryan had formally signed their divorce papers 3 months earlier, a smooth process. No fights over assets or bitter disputes, since there were no kids, and most of what they owned had been split fairly and maturely. A sign that, despite everything, mutual respect was still intact. It was on a December night, at Ryan's company holiday party, that he ran into an old college friend who also knew Emma. The conversation, inevitably, turned to her. "She's doing great," the friend said. "Ran into her last week, really into some new project. She seems lighter, you know? More like herself." The words, said with no ill intent, hit Ryan like a punch to the stomach. more like herself, as if, during the marriage, she'd been a smaller, dimmer version of who she really was. And deep down, he knew there was truth to that. That night, driving home alone, Ryan let himself feel the full weight of regret for the first time since the separation. He thought about every time he'd chosen work over her. He thought about the dinners she used to make with care that he ate distractedly, never noticing the effort. He thought about the night of the candles burning out alone at the table, the scene she'd described in tears. During their final conversation, a scene he didn't even remember because he'd only been there physically, never emotionally, he cried that night finally. Cried for the first time since the separation, a cry that carried months of buried denial. Across town, Emma was facing her own ghosts. Despite the progress, despite therapy, despite rebuilding the self-esteem and identity she felt she'd lost inside the marriage, there were nights when the loneliness hit differently. Not the loneliness of being without company, but a very specific ache for one specific person, a longing for the way Ryan used to laugh at her bad jokes in the early years, a longing for his smell, a longing for a closeness that, whatever else, had been real. There was an episode a few weeks before the bookstore reunion, you'll hear about that in a moment, that deepened this regret even further. She was organizing a shelf in her new apartment when she found, among a few things she'd brought from the old place, a crumpled paper napkin tucked for no clear reason inside a book for years. She recognized Ryan's handwriting, a note scribbled in a hurry one morning, years earlier, before heading to work. Woke up today and thought about how lucky I am. Love you, back by 7. She didn't even remember that particular day, but there it was, proof that even in the hardest years, even as the silence between them grew, there had been small acts of love she'd simply stopped noticing, dulled by exhaustion and accumulated hurt. She sat down on the bedroom floor, holding that faded scrap of paper, and cried like she hadn't cried since the early months after the separation, not just out of sadness, but a complicated longing, mixed with the painful realization that maybe she too had played a part in slowly erasing the small gestures of love Ryan, in his limited way, had tried to offer. It was that night that Emma decided, for the first time since the separation, that if fate ever put Ryan in her path again, she wouldn't run from the conversation. She wouldn't promise anything, wouldn't build up expectations, but she also wouldn't shut the door out of pure fear or pride. The way she had so many times before, both of them, separately, each on their own path of rebuilding, began carrying the same quiet question. Was there still a chance? The reunion fate, or maybe just the fact that it wasn't such a big city after all, put them face to face again 7 months later at a bookstore downtown. During a book launch they'd both been invited to by mutual friends, neither aware the other would be there. Emma saw him first, across the room, examining a book cover with that focused expression she knew so well. Her heart raced in a way she hadn't felt in months. Ryan noticed her looking almost at the same moment. For an instant, time seemed to stop. The kind of pause that only happens when two people who once loved each other deeply run into each other again, after everything. They walked toward each other, a little hesitant, unsure exactly what kind of distance was appropriate between an ex-husband and an ex-wife who, despite everything, still carried each other around inside their chests. "You look beautiful," he said, and immediately regretted how forward it sounded, worried it might come off wrong. But Emma smiled, a genuine smile. The first genuine smile they'd shared in almost 2 years. "You look different," she replied. "Good different." They talked for almost an hour, right there in a quiet corner of the bookstore, while the event went on around them, forgotten. They talked about work, about therapy, about their own processes of self-discovery. There was, in the conversation, a new sincerity, mature, without the defensiveness and pride that had worn the relationship down years earlier. At one point, Emma mentioned, almost in passing, that she still had the shoebox with the old letters. Ryan smiled, a sad, genuine smile. "I reread my copies a few months ago," he admitted. "Went to grab the boxes you'd left, just to organize things, and ended up sitting on the living room floor for 2 hours reading through all of it. kept thinking about how I knew how to write down everything I felt on paper, but couldn't say it looking you in the eye. I noticed that too, Emma said quietly. I thought you just didn't know how to express yourself. But you did. You just kept saving it for later. And later never came. He told her then about therapy, about the conversation with his brother, about their father's rigid upbringing, about finally understanding where that habit of shutting down came from. Emma listened closely, recognizing in him a kind of self-awareness she'd never seen during the marriage. I wish we'd had this conversation 3 years ago, Ryan said, his voice breaking. Maybe we wouldn't have even ended up here. Maybe, Emma answered. Or maybe we needed to go through all of it to be able to have this conversation today, the way we're having it right now. There's no way to know. There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with meaning. Outside the bookstore, night had already fallen, and neither of them seemed to notice the time passing. Gathering a courage he didn't know he had, Ryan finally said what he'd been holding on to for months. I think about you all the time, Emma, and I wish I'd done things differently. I wish I'd listened before it was too late. Emma felt her eyes well up. Part of her wanted to just reach out and hug him, tell him she felt the same way, that she regretted it too, that maybe there was still a chance. But another part of her, more cautious, shaped by months of rebuilding and by the pain of a past that couldn't simply be erased, held back. I think about you too, she admitted, her voice shaking. But Ryan, regret isn't the same thing as being ready. And I don't know if the two of us today would actually do things differently, or if we'd just repeat the same mistakes, only more afraid this time. He nodded, his eyes full of a sadness that recognized the truth in her words, even as it hurt to hear them. Can I at least call you? He asked. No pressure, no expectations, just so I don't lose this again. Emma hesitated for a long moment before answering. You can. What everyone else said word that Emma and Ryan were talking again didn't take long to reach family and close friends, and the reactions were as varied as they were telling. Claire, who'd watched her sister's suffering up close during and after the marriage, took the news cautiously. I just don't want to see you get hurt the same way again, she said. One afternoon when Emma told her about the recent meetups with Ryan, has he actually changed? Or is he just missing how easy things used to be for him? The question bothered Emma, not because it was unfair, but precisely because she'd already asked herself the same thing. Quietly, more than once, Emma's mother, on the other hand, was openly rooting for a reconciliation. She still kept the wedding photos in an album and often talked about what a good son-in-law Ryan had always been, flaws and all. Nobody's perfect, honey. What matters is whether he's genuinely willing to change, she'd say, part sincere advice, part her own wish to see her daughter settled, as she liked to put it. On Ryan's side, his older brother, Marcus, the same one who'd confronted him about the emotional patterns inherited from their father, reacted with a mix of hope and concern. I'm glad you're opening up more, Marcus told him during one conversation. But don't go back to her just because you're scared of being alone. Go back if it's because you've genuinely become someone who can give her what she needs. Otherwise, you're both just going to relive the same movie. His brother's words kept nagging at Ryan for days. There was a truth in it he needed to face. Was this pull toward reconnection driven by renewed, mature love, or just by fear of loneliness, by nostalgia for a simpler time? Mutual friends of the couple, who'd watched both the good years and the final wear and tear, also weighed in, each in their own way. Some openly rooted for them to get back together, remembering a time when Emma and Ryan had seemed like the most solid couple among all their friends. Others, more cautious, warned about the risk of romanticizing the past, forgetting the real reasons the marriage had ended. Amid all these outside voices, Emma and Ryan tried with difficulty to listen mostly to their own inner voice. No easy task. When you're carrying the weight of hope, fear, and everyone else's opinion all tangled together. What's left? After The weeks following the bookstore reunion, Emma and Ryan started talking again, cautiously at first, like people walking on ground that had already proven unstable once. Short calls, occasional texts, coffee here, coffee there. Nothing rushed, nothing defined. There was, in these meetups, a new kind of care, almost reverent, around the words they chose. Both of them seemed more attentive, more present, as if they'd each learned, through pain and distance, in their own way, the real cost of silence. But time had also left marks that good intentions alone couldn't erase. Emma had rebuilt an independent life she was proud of, a life she still wasn't sure she wanted or should merge back into Ryan's. There was fear, real and valid, that the story would repeat itself, that the relief of reconnecting was just that, temporary relief, not a solid foundation for something lasting. Ryan, for his part, fought against his own old patterns, the habit of shutting down when things got uncomfortable, the temptation to disappear back into work whenever conversations got too hard. Therapy had helped, but breaking habits built over a lifetime doesn't happen overnight, and they both knew it. There was, in fact, a small conflict during this stretch that tested how real their change actually was. One night when they'd planned to have dinner together, Ryan canceled last minute because of a work issue, the same kind of cancellation that, in the past, would have been the spark for a fresh round of silent resentment. This time, though, Emma decided to do things differently. Instead of bottling up the frustration the way she used to, she called him that same night. "I understand things come up," she said, her voice steady but not hostile. "But I need you to know this got to me. It reminded me of how things used to be, and that scared me." On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence, not the old evasive kind, but the silence of someone actually taking in what they just heard before reacting. "You're right to be upset," Ryan answered, finally. "And I could have called to give you a heads up instead of just texting last minute. I'll try to manage my week better, but more importantly, thank you for telling me now instead of holding it in." That's new for us, right? Saying things in the moment. That small exchange, seemingly minor, meant far more than it looked like on the surface. It was living proof that something had, in fact, changed in the way the two of them communicated. Not the absence of mistakes or unexpected mishaps, which are part of any human relationship, but the renewed ability to handle them without letting them turn into buried silence. Even so, Emma walked away from that call with a mix of relief and caution. One good moment didn't erase years of a pattern. It would take a lot more than a few weeks of good conversations to rebuild trust that had taken years to wear down. One Sunday afternoon, sitting on a park bench after a comfortable silence, a silence different from the ones in the past, one that didn't hide hurt, just reflection, Ryan finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air for weeks. "What do you want, Emma?" "Really?" She took her time answering. She looked down at her hands, then back at him, an expression mixing affection and uncertainty in equal parts. "I want to believe people can change," she said, slowly, choosing each word with care. "I want to believe the love we had wasn't for nothing. But I've also learned, the hard way, that wanting isn't enough. Both people need to be ready at the same time, in the same way, for the right reasons. And I don't know if we're there yet, or if we ever will be." Ryan listened in silence, his chest tight, recognizing in every word a truth he himself feared deep down. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma looked out at the horizon, at the sun beginning to set behind the buildings, painting the sky an orange the two of them, years ago, would have admired together without hesitation. "I think we keep going like this for now," she answered. "No rush, no promises too big for where we actually are right now. Seeing if what we feel today holds up over time, or if it's just missing what used to be, dressed up as hope." There was no definitive answer that afternoon, no declared reconciliation, No final and definite goodbye either. There were just two adults, marked by their own failures and their own growth, choosing to walk slowly down an uncertain road without guarantees, but also without the destructive urgency that may have helped end things the first time around. Maybe, someday, a few months later, Emma and Ryan are still meeting, still talking, still building, brick by brick, a new way of relating to each other. More conscious, more careful, more honest than before. It's still unknown whether this path will lead them back to the altar, or whether it will lead them only to a deep, healed friendship without the weight of what was once a marriage. In one of the last conversations before this story closes, Emma, sitting on the balcony of the new apartment that was now just hers, wrote in a notebook, a habit she'd picked up in therapy, a reflection that summed up, maybe better than any conversation could, the place where she and Ryan found themselves. Maybe the love we had never really died. Maybe it just went into a coma, waiting to see if we'd actually try to bring it back, or if we'd let the machine shut off for good. I still don't know what the answer's going to be. And for the first time, I think I'm okay not knowing. Ryan, for his part, had also changed, not just in how he related to Emma, but in how he related to himself. He kept going to therapy, now on his own, no longer as part of a couple's process, but as a personal commitment to never again become the man who hid behind work every time life got too hard to feel. In the meetups, the two of them still kept up, more and more frequent, more and more like the early days of dating, but with an extra layer of maturity and scar tissue. There was laughter again. There were also, it's true, moments of heavy silence, memories that still ached, unanswered questions about whether it would ever be possible to fully trust again after so much time spent holding on to hurt. In one of the last recorded moments of this story, the two of them were walking side by side down some ordinary street in the city, on a cool fall night with no destination in mind, just talking. At some point, their hands brushed, almost by accident, and neither of them pulled away. They kept walking like that, in silence, hands almost touching for a few more blocks, neither one daring to take the next step, neither one willing to pull back either. Maybe that image, two hands touching, but not yet fully intertwined, is the best way to describe where Emma and Ryan stand today. No longer the broken couple from 2 years ago, but not yet the rebuilt couple they once were either. An uncertain middle ground full of cautious hope and justified fear, where every gesture carries the weight of two people who've already been hurt and don't want to be hurt again, but who also don't want, out of fear, to let something slip away that might still be worth holding on to. What we do know is that both of them learned, in the most painful way possible, that love alone isn't enough to hold a relationship together. It takes presence. It takes listening. It takes the courage to speak up before silence becomes a habit and habit becomes a chasm. Some stories end with a clear resolution, a rebuilt marriage, or a final goodbye that brings peace. But there are also stories like Emma and Ryan's, stories that keep writing themselves day after day with no set destination, just the cautious hope that this time maybe they'll get it right. If you've ever been through something like this, if you've ever pulled away from someone you loved out of pride, out of silence, out of fear of being vulnerable, leave your story in the comments below. Sometimes the first step toward not repeating the same mistakes is simply saying them out loud. And what about you? Do Emma and Ryan deserve a second chance? Or are some goodbyes, no matter how much they hurt, final for a reason? The end.